Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com, digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Boring. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin. Rick, kind of a lull before the storm. We've got a holiday week this week, so we're doing the podcast today early. It does come after the Reds do win the season or the series opener at the New York Yankees. They've been really good at that, by the way, this year. They're 19-9 in series openers. The problem is they don't follow it up with a ton of wins after that. But so we're doing this a little bit early this week, but really there's no training camp yet to talk about. We're not into complete college football, though we've got a college football topic to talk about. So kind of one of those light weeks, which can be good for all of us sometimes.
I'm curious, how are you during a holiday week? I mean, you're not someone who listens to a ton of podcasts in general, but do you consume any content during a holiday weekend like this?
Not a chance. No, not at all.
It's interesting because I've always felt like no one would watch or listen during like a 4th of July week when everyone's going to be cashing in for the rest of the week and going to the lake or whatever. But I find podcasts typically get a lot of listens during these holiday breaks. And I think it's maybe because everyone's driving around.
That's probably true. I mean, like driving to the lake or driving to a celebration. I could see driving 2 hours to grandma's house for that. I could, especially on a long weekend like this where, a lot of people will take Friday off or even have Friday off from their company.
Right.
We do not. We have the 4th off, but not the 5th. But I mean, nobody's going to accomplish anything on the 5th anyway. And then you got the long weekend after that. Heck, if you threw a Monday vacation day in there, you could make it a mini vacation starting today. So to your point, that's probably true.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people do, and maybe that's why the content listens are up a little bit during 4th of July week. We'll see if that remains true for us. The Reds went 3-2 since we last spoke. They're now 40-45, 4th in the NL Central, 10 games back of the first place Brewers, and 4.5 games back of the third wildcard spot in the National League. Let's start with this. Jonathan India had an insane month of June. That's what a lot of people have been talking about over the last few days. He's now first on the Reds in batting average, 278, on base percentage at 381, second on the team in hits and doubles. His 13 doubles in June were the most by a Reds player in a calendar month since Joey Votto in September of 2009. So with all that being said, where do you think Jonathan India fits in the Reds' future plans? There was a ton of talk about him being traded last year or in the offseason, and I think it's come up a little bit again this year, even when he struggled early. Where are you at now with Jonathan India? And more importantly, where should the Reds be at with him?
I think they should dangle him at this trade deadline, to be honest with you, because I there's no question they need outfield bats desperately. I mean, the outfield bats, if you take Spencer Steers starts in the outfield out of the mix, the outfield bats are horrific. The slash lines are just anemic. So you need that help long term. You have what you would hope and expect to be a long-term solution at second base, right? And that would be Matt McClain. You may have to piecemeal it this year because Matt McClain probably isn't going to be back, but he's your long-term second baseman. So with that in mind, at that point, where does Jonathan India fit on the roster? He probably doesn't. And again, there was some hand-wringing when they extended him back in the offseason of what are you doing? It ended up working out because they wound up needing Jonathan India. But if he's going to get you a long-term solution in the outfield, if he's part of a package that gets you a guy that's not just here for the rest of this year as an outfielder, but moving forward for maybe another couple of controllable years, however it would work out, I think you have to dangle him. I will say, I mean, to his credit, he certainly he has helped their cause as much as anything else, both in the short term and maybe with what they could get for him if they dangle him.
Yeah, I guess, there's fans like to flip so quickly on these things. Like if a guy's going bad, he's the worst ever, send him to AAA, trade him, get rid of him. Then as soon as he starts doing well, it's like, why would you consider trading him? He's just playing well. He's a cornerstone for us. And it's like, I mean, neither is true, obviously. The answer is somewhere in the middle on Jonathan India. The question is, I guess, do you think there is some long-term value? Like he was rookie of the year. He had basically 2 down years in a row that weren't very impressive and started this year off slow. And now all of a sudden he's starting to show some of the same type of fire at the plate that he had his rookie year. And it's like, oh, this is maybe the upward trajectory people had expected for him 2 years ago after that first season when he was so impressive. I guess, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like there's still upside that he can be a star player in the National League?
No, I think he can be a very solid player, which he's shown at the moment. I mean, he obviously had a special month, no doubt about that. But I think he was always going to be a solid player. The thing is, long term, where does he play? Where does he fit in? He doesn't. I think that's the thing. I guess, you dangle him at the trade deadline. If you don't get the offer you're looking for, it's not the end of the world to keep him because he will finish out the year likely as the starting second baseman. And I guess it gives you insurance that I can't assume or presume that Matt McClain comes back 100%. Matt McClain comes back at all. I'm hoping that. We're all hoping that. If it's the Matt McClain we saw last year, that's your future second baseman. So, he is also an insurance policy in that regard, but he's not a cornerstone. He's a man without an island. I mean, he's playing second base by default at the moment. He's never going to be a great defensive second baseman, for goodness sakes.
We made that mistake with multiple guys after last season, though, seeing a glimpse of them last year and saying, projecting out what they're going to be for the future in the Reds. And this year, that hasn't proven true for some of those guys. Is it possible that like McClain or Marte or one of these younger infielders that were putting in permanent markers saying they're the second baseman or third baseman of the future, is it possible that maybe we're too high on one of those guys?
Sure, because they haven't proven it for long periods of time, but that's the calculation you have to make here is, what you saw from Matt McClain suggests he is going to be a long-time successful player in this league if he stays healthy. Noelvi Marte, maybe the jury's out a little bit because of smaller sample size, but, he was always considered a top prospect, came up and proved it in a short period of time, and, obviously was struggling at Louisville, and after that first game in St. Louis has kind of struggled since, but that's such a small sample size, you can't make a judgment on that. So, again, if you flip Jonathan India at the trade deadline, I wouldn't go crazy. I would hope, again, it's for something of a long-term solution for an outfielder. But if you hang on to him, I'm okay with that for the short period of time. Maybe dangle him then again in the offseason, and you have more information at that point on Matt McClain's health. I think that's also has to factor in. Again, I would expect Matt McClain comes back, but this feels like this thing's going on and on and on and on and on. And maybe it was a pipe dream to think he'd come back at any point this year. And maybe the best thing is he doesn't play at all this year. But yeah, either way, I'm good with it. I don't consider Jonathan India a cornerstone. Do I consider him a starting player? I do, just not on this team if Matt McClain's healthy.
How much value do you think there is as a trade bait piece? Do you think they can get some type of return for him, or at least package him with something else for a decent return?
It would still have to include a prospect. I mean, it would have to include a top prospect, in my opinion. Maybe not Cam Collier, certainly not Rhett Lauder. I would hope not Chase Petty, but maybe him. Somebody else would have to be packaged in that deal because somebody's going to want more controllable assets than Jonathan India, who's closer to who's actually into arbitration and closer to free agency. So, you would have to package him with something. It wouldn't just be a straight up deal, in my opinion.
All right, as we're talking about how well India's been playing, and all of a sudden he's risen to the top of the Reds statistical leaderboards in a lot of different categories, we're also approaching the All-Star game. And talks about who is going to be the Reds All-Star this year have been percolating. I know a lot of people are on the Elly De La Cruz part of the conversation and kind of stuck there of like, well, we think it's going to be Elly, but if it's not, then we'll just talk about that later. Where are you at on this? Because it also feels like there are a couple of guys ahead of Elly at the shortstop position right now.
Well, I will tell you this. Elly leads all shortstops in runs scored, home runs. I believe he's second or third in WAR. He leads all shortstops in OPS. He clearly leads all shortstops because he leads all of Major League Baseball in stolen bases. That is an all-star season for me. Now, the problem is Colorado has to have a representative, and their best position player by far is shortstop Ezequiel Tovar. They do have a closer that they could maybe get as a on the all-star team as a player. And the same thing for I can't remember, it was Washington, maybe, or was it second base? The way I looked at it was believe it or not, Elly has probably a harder path to make it than Jonathan India does positionally. At the same time, though, to me, I think I'm taking Elly over Ezequiel Tovar and letting Colorado get a pitcher on the staff and be done with that. And I think at that point, Elly is going to be the all-star. To me, it's between three guys. It's India, Elly, and Fernando Cruz, and I just don't think that's going to take place. I think it's going to be Elly for every reason you can imagine. Like I said, just go by the positional ranks for him. The fact that Mookie Betts is obviously out doesn't hurt, but they would end up taking three shortstops. Elly would probably be the third of the three, maybe the second three, whatever. But I think they take three shortstops, and I do think Elly's the guy that is the Reds representative, despite Jonathan India really coming on and actually at his position group being among the leaders in a bunch of different stats.
Do you think there's any potential for one of the starting pitchers to make it, or no?
I don't. I mean, you could make a case for Hunter Green. Believe it or not, Hunter Green in WAR is either second or third, I think. I looked at this a couple of days ago. He's up there, certainly, among all pitchers, among all qualifying pitchers. Cruz leads the majors in strikeouts per innings pitched. And if you take a couple of his outings out of there, the ERA doesn't pop at you. But if you take a couple of his stints out of the mix, and 30 of his 33 appearances, he's been lights out for the most part, or whatever it would be. I think he's a possibility, but there's so many pitchers to choose from. And like I said, you go around and look at some of the teams that are all going to get one guy. It's probably, for most of those teams, going to be a pitcher.
One of the other topics that have come with the All-Star game and the Reds and Ellie is the home run derby. He is not going to participate in this year's home run derby. Do you like that decision by Ellie De La Cruz?
I do. I have no empirical proof that it ruins guys. I don't. I'm not going to do some deep dive analytic study on it. I just don't need him screwing up his swing at this point. He feels like he's got himself in a nice groove from both sides of the plate at the moment. Remember for a while he had a really hard time hitting right-handed against lefties as a switch hitter, and it feels like, he hit a home run. The home run he hit last on Tuesday night was as a right-handed batter, and it was a missile. So yeah, I just no. I the other part too, honestly, is I do think he's the representative, so he's not going to get much of a break. I'd hate to add another layer to it with the home run derby for a guy who, because you've had to do it almost by default, hasn't gotten, but I think, one day off. And that one day off, he actually came in and played late. So he's played in every game and started all but one this year. I mean, the guy could probably use a little bit of a break, and, sitting around on the bench and getting an at bat in the All-Star game is not going to kill him. But at home run derby's taxing, man.
It is, and it's not even necessarily the actual physical side of it necessarily, right? It's just all the mental aspects of this season for Ellie. He's the face of the franchise. He's the cover boy for the, I think it was Upper Decker Tops, the new baseball card release thing. He was the poster boy for all that. So he's doing extra photo shoots, doing extra marketing stuff. Now you're going to go do the home run derby and the All-Star game potentially. I mean, there's just no time for him to sit down, decompress, and relax a little bit. And again, do guys go through this all the time and do fine with it? Yes. Are there articles out there, like you were talking about, that have looked up the evidence of guys participating in the home run derby and whether or not they struggle in the second half of the season after that? And it points to, on average, not necessarily. But there are definitely cases where that has happened to guys. And maybe
I think it happened to Todd Frazier. I think it clearly happened to Todd Frazier.
Right. And maybe it wasn't necessarily the home run derby. Maybe there were other reasons. Maybe they're always going to fall off. But why take that chance? Why mess with a guy, especially when he's this young and he's still finding his way and he does have all this extra pressure on him? If he was participating in the home run derby, I'd be thrilled to watch it. I'd be looking forward to it. He's an exciting player. He's got a ton of power and a skinny frame. It's fun to watch him do the things that he does. So I wouldn't be like throwing a fit if he were participating in the home run derby. I don't think it's a huge deal. Yeah. But overall, I like this decision. I think it's the smart one.
Yeah. The home run derby to me has gone the way of the slam dunk contest. It's just, it does
a little bit, right?
Me.
Isn't that crazy though? Because it felt like the home run derby was always just such a solid event. It was fun to watch. It was easy.
Rick, I'll be honest with you. I've covered a lot of sporting events in my lifetime, and as much as I'm crapping on the home run derby at the moment, covering that home run derby when it was in town in 2015 for the All-Star game was fabulous. I mean, it was an electric event. It really was. But it just, again,
why has it lost the luster?
I don't know. I guess because it just, I honestly don't know the answer to that. I really don't.
Do we really just have too many entertaining things going on to where our attention spans are so short? That's like, it's just not enough anymore. It's just not
the same thing like this dude, when the slam dunk contest was first held in the ABA back in 1976. It was cool to see Dr. J dunk from the foul line, to see, David Thompson do a 360. It feels like, no, we've seen every dunk known to mankind. And maybe that's what it is. I've seen every home run.
Well, see, I think that's where they differ, though. Like, the home run derby it's just like, you could be the one that hits X amount of home runs in your turn. Like, you can still set a record with how many home runs you hit, or you can still hit the farthest home run that we've ever seen. There's still like bragging rights there. With the dunk contest, I do think to some extent it got so maxed out in terms of what you can do physically. Like, there aren't many more dunks you can do just based off human capabilities that we haven't seen already. And then what happened was guys didn't want to get embarrassed. They didn't want to go there and be embarrassed. So now it's no longer the top athletes doing it or the top dunkers doing it. It's like random dudes that no one cares about. And that's part of why it's lost so much.
I'm not even sure I can tell you. Did that Mac McClung, was that this year that he won the slam dunk or last year?
He's won it twice now.
Oh, okay. All right. I remember.
He won this year.
Yeah. Okay. So there we go. I paid no attention to it.
And he wasn't in the NBA. He was in the G.
No. Yeah, that's why I didn't think he played on a team. Okay, all right.
Yeah. I think he was 2 years ago. He won it when he was on a team as a rookie, and then this year he won it as a G leaguer. And they have guys that I think like aren't even in the G League or the NBA participating in the dunk contest now sometimes. So, all right. One other topic here on the Reds before we move on, Skinny. Ken Griffey Jr. received his final payment from the Cincinnati Reds on Monday. The team had been making annual payments of $3.5 million for the last 16 years of Junior after he deferred $57.5 million of his contract nearly 2 decades ago. So, Skinny, now that he's all paid up, Looking back on Ken Griffey Jr.'s time with the Reds, do you think it was worth it?
I think it was. It's just a shame how it all played out. Again, I had my run in with him when I suggested that he be moved to a corner outfield spot, and he didn't like that suggestion and made it actually a national story. And I'll stand by it to this day, because at that point of his career, he probably should have been and was probably better served being a corner outfielder than a center fielder. The injuries took their toll, but he did have milestone moments in Cincinnati. He had some special moments. The health is what we'll remember. And honestly, that contract was just brilliant. I mean, the way they structured that deal, it was put into an annuity. I was told that actually, while it's reported as $3.6 million, because that's what was been paid, I guess, into the annuity each time, he gets about $5 million thanks to some of that. So what a brilliant contract. That was for 16 years. He got that kind of money for doing nothing.
Just think about that. What a setup for life. People talk about
no doubt.
Weight gain and stuff. It's like, man, if I was getting $5 million a year basically to do nothing, I think I would be living large too. I don't think I'd be in very good shape.
No, I mean, his and Bobby Bonilla's deal are two of the smartest ones. In fact, Shohei's got a similar deal going with even more money attached to it in deferrals. It's brilliant. I mean, he's 54 years old, getting really, I mean, he's won the lottery for 16 straight years, while not even having to play a ticket.
And he had already cashed $100 million in his career before that, right? It's not like he didn't have the money up front on top of it. So truly a brilliant contract. But looking back,
we put that story up each time, and it always does really well, because it is fascinating to look and go, wait a minute, he's the third highest paid Red. He technically isn't, but it's fun to put it in that context.
Well, that's the part of it that makes it even crazier. Is the Reds have had such a low payroll the last few years that he ends up being one of the highest paid players on the team every year too.
Yep, for sure.
In theory.
But back to your initial question, I think it was worth it. I do. I mean, I wish it had wound up better. I don't think that's all him. And honestly, again, playing all those years on concrete in the Kingdom didn't help set him up for here. It probably set him up to fail. It really took a toll on his body.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. And I guess when I look at it, I'd much rather have Ken Griffey Jr. play on the Reds for all those years. And it really defined a lost era of Reds baseball. I mean, if you're a fan in those years, which were basically my end of my middle school into my high school years there that Griffey was here for, that's all I remember really is Griffey being on the team, him and Barry Larkin kind of at the end there, their locker room stuff that was going on. Those are the memories I have of those years of Reds baseball. There's not a lot else to really look to there. They never made the playoffs with Ken Griffey Jr. Well, that part of it sucks. I mean,
and honestly, I blame Jim Bowden for some of that. He thought that was the be-all, end-all making the Ken Griffey Jr. trade, and then he had so many poor drafts around it and so many other bad decisions that they really didn't build a ball club.
I bring this up every time I think we talk about Ken Griffey Jr., but I can just never get out of my head. I remember so vividly at that time that Pokey Reese was untradeable, untouchable. That was holding up the Ken Griffey Jr. deal. They ended up having to give a lot of other things away, Mike Cameron, all these other guys, because they wouldn't trade Pokey Reese for Ken Griffey Jr.
Yeah, well,
that's crazy to think about.
Hall of Famer. Oh no, wait a minute. He didn't make the Hall of Fame. My bad.
How much longer did he last in the major leagues? 6 years?
Enough.
7 years?
Yeah, I was to say enough.
Yeah, I mean, but he was horrible. He never hit over 220 the rest of his career, I don't think.
I don't believe he did.
Anything else to get to on Griffey, the Reds, Skinny?
No, I think you covered the gamut.
All right, let's move on to the Bengals. We'll start with this, Skinny. Stripe Hype had a column titled 3 Players Who Could Be in Their Final Season with the Bengals. The 3 players they listed were T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson, and Trent Brown. So rank each of those 3 guys 1 to 10 on their likelihood of being with the Bengals past this season. Obviously, Hendrickson has another year on his contract, but the thought was since he asked for a trade this year that maybe they would look to trade him to get some value out of him before he walks.
Well, Trent Brown definitely is not going to be on this roster. He would be the definitive not a chance in Hades that he'll be on this roster after this year. The only way it would be is if Amarius Mims plays and suffers some catastrophic injury and he won't ever play again, and Trent Brown, you still try to negotiate with him at that point, but he'd be the least. T, I almost would put it at a scale. It's 10 being the highest that they won't be here.
Yeah, 10 will be they're definitely gone no matter what.
9.9 on T. I just don't see a scenario. You could see a scenario. I just don't see it taking place that he's back with this team. And then Trey, I honestly, before he got the contract extension last year, I honestly thought the Bengals were going to let him walk after this past season. The way his contract was structured, you wouldn't have taken a ton of a dead cap hit. You owed him a big chunk in base salary that you could have got out from under. I thought that's really why they drafted Miles Murphy in the first place. But they went ahead and extended Trey before that took place, and obviously wanted to get an extra year out of him. I would put him probably right at the five mark, the midway, 50-50 either way. I think some of it will depend on how does Miles Murphy play this season in that rotational role. Where does things stand with Jamar Chase's contract? What other holes maybe they think they have to fill, and getting out from underneath that it'll be a dead cap hit, but again, it'll be less of one because of the base salary that he's also due to make in 2025. So he'd be the only one of those three that I think has a shot to come back. And again, I'd put it, I may even put it at 60-40 that he's back with this team next year.
All right. Well, we are in the middle of Mount Rushmore season. We've talked about that. We've been doing it for a few weeks now.
Yes, we are.
We'll continue right down that path here. ESPN had a write-up with a bunch of different little categories, but one of them was non-starter to know. And they went with receiver Trenton Irwin. They wrote, it's hard to tell who's going to be the third receiver behind Chase and Higgins, but Irwin actually scored higher than Higgins in ESPN's receiver tracking metrics last season and had a receiving DVOA of 20.8%, which ranked 10th among receivers with 10 to 49 pass targets. Skinny, if you were writing the capsule for that headline, Bengals non-starter to know, who would you have gone with?
He's in that group. I got to be honest with you. Man, that's a tough one because I'm trying to think of positions. I can't come up with one, to be honest with you. Do you have one that I can play off of? Because
would Miles Murphy be considered a non-starter?
He is a non-starter, yeah, because he's a rotational.
Would that potentially be in play there? I know we were talking. Paul Daner thinks he's going to get 10 sacks potentially. We were talking.
I know, and I didn't disagree with that. I think he'll be a rotational pass rush piece of actually a sub pass rush piece. I think what you'll see Miles Murphy and Trey Anderson as the ends, and then playing games with Sam Hubbard in different roles across that defensive line on third downs.
This may be cheating too, but Chase Brown potentially, if he's backup running back. I mean,
yeah, I guess the key question is who technically gets the first carry of each game, and that becomes the starter. So is that is there a package where he's in there because that's his package and he gets the first carry of the game and hence he's listed as a starter, right?
It feels like cheating to use him because it does feel like he's likely going to get a share of the carries automatically. It's not like he's a true backup necessarily.
Yeah. And can I go back to the ESPN metrics? And you know me, I think analytics certainly has its place. And Trent Irwin never is going to pass the eyeball test for whatever stereotypical reason you want to do. T. Higgins always does. And this is going to sound extremely critical. And I don't mean it to be. Listen, that's where I go back to this whole, everybody's losing their mind about not paying T. And I'm sorry, he makes spectacular plays. That catch in Minnesota is still against Minnesota is going to go down as one of the greatest plays I've ever watched in person. To not only jump up and catch it, but then whip it around the pylon for a touchdown. He does spectacular things, but again, for the most part, he's a okay receiver. I think he's a top 25-ish, but not in that upper echelon that he deserves to get paid that kind of money that he's asking for. Somebody's going to pay it, bully for them, but I know that's going to be an unpopular decision because T does spectacular things. But when you look at some of his numbers and the injury issues, I just go, okay, get one more year out of him and call it a day. I don't know why everybody's losing their minds about it. You're not losing a future Hall of Famer here. You're losing a starting caliber wide receiver. I think Trent Irwin in the right circumstance can be a major weapon.
I really like T. Higgins. I also feel like there's a high probability whoever pays T. Higgins this next contract is going to
regret it. I agree.
Yeah. All right. Continuing with this theme here, CBS's Pete Prisco did his top 100 NFL player rankings. He had 3 Bengals in his top 33. Jamar Chase was number 13. Joe Burrow was 15th. And Trey Hendrickson was 33rd. I got a few questions about this, Skinny. First of all, those are the only 3 players inside his top 100 from the Bengals that made the list. Are there any players you were surprised that were left off of the top 100 list?
Well, the fact he's been a Pro Bowler, he wasn't this past year. And he wasn't great. He wasn't what you were hoping he would be, but at the same time, he was pretty steady for the most part. Orlando Brown perhaps is a little surprising, isn't it?
It's a good point. Yeah. Again, it's always easy to say like, this guy is definitely a top 100 player until you actually sit down and do the rankings yourself and realize how many good players there are.
And that's right.
And that's one of those guys where it's like you'd have to actually probably play out how many linemen are better than him and then all the other positions as well.
And that's probably fair.
he's a guy that you would think would be in the conversation for sure. So if you're just glancing at the list, that's one. Are you surprised Trey Hendrickson is as high as 33?
Yeah, a little bit. And, you know, the sack is a number we all love, and he does pressure the quarterback. You know, there's times he's out of position in the run game. I wish it was better. To me, he's a very good player. I just think the sack thing just swallows us all whole at the end of the day, where we look at that number and go, wow, what a great season. It was good. I think he's good. I think he's a very good player. And I think he certainly deserves to be in the top 100. I don't know where I'd put him. I'd have to look at the whole list, but 33 feels extraordinarily high. I would say this. Do you think Trey Hendrickson dominates games the way Chris Jones dominates games?
No, that's exactly where I was going to go next with this. Is I just don't feel like he's a dominant player. And to me, I mean, anyone in the top 35, when you're looking through them, it feels like pretty dominant players for the most part. I was surprised that it was that high. And then to your point about it, the sack number holding such value, he jumped nearly 60 spots from his ranking in last year's Pete Prisco top 100. So that tells you that, you know, the sack number goes up, all of a sudden they completely feel differently about the type of player he is.
Yeah. And he gets pressures too. It's not just the sacks. There's also pressures that go along with it, quarterback hits that go along with it, all those things. And he's high in those metrics too. But again, I never cover a game going, boy, Trey Hendrickson just wrecked that game. He wrecks moments on occasion. But I never look at him. I mean, I've watched Chris Jones beat the Bengals almost by himself a couple years ago in the AFC Championship game. He really did.
Yes. I mean, I like Trey Hendrickson. He's been one of the best additions the Bengals have made.
Great signing. Great signing.
In my entire lifetime. But I would also say, like, he is not a guy that would scare me if he was an opponent. Like, you wouldn't sit there all week going, oh my God, they've got to block Trey Hendrickson this week.
Like J.J. Watt, like Myles Garrett.
Exactly. And the Bengals, as Bengals fans, we do that all the time because of their terrible offensive line. We're like, oh God, who do they got on the end? Trey Hendrickson would be one of the weeks where I'm going, all right, they don't have a monster there. You know, I mean, that's just right. So I guess my thought is when I saw this ranking, the top third of the top 100 was surprising to me. I was expecting him to be like somewhere around 66th, maybe the second to third of the top 100.
The one thing I will say about Trey in a positive manner is there is a consistency level with him, right? It's not like 5 sacks one game, then 6 games without a sack, then 4 sacks in another game, and the sack total becomes big. Trey's a pretty consistent player. I think that is a positive, and maybe sometimes we take that for granted when we're looking at he doesn't wreck games. I'm just going off the eyeball test that he doesn't wreck games because I don't think he does. I think he affects games. I just don't think he wrecks them.
Yeah, good point. Also, one last question on this. Would you rank Jamar Chase higher than Joe Burrow if you were doing an overall players ranking for the Bengals?
I think I would. And it's because Jamar's durability more than Joe's durability. You probably can't rank one without the other, right? And maybe they should be 13A and 13B be ranked together. They're really close, obviously, at 13 and 15. But I mean, look, Jamar Chase is one of the 2 or 3 best wide receivers in football. I can make an argument because of Joe Burrow's health that he's 5 to 7 in that range. And again, so that's where we're very much splitting hairs here. They're 2 spots apart from each other. And if you flip flop them, I wouldn't argue that that's a bad flip flop either. So.
Right. Yeah. That's the funny thing about this is it's like almost that Pete Prisco acknowledged exactly what you're saying of like, you really can't rank these guys far apart. They're basically 1A and 1B for the Bengals, however you want to sort that out. So he put them at 13th and 15th. I'm surprised it wasn't just 13th and 14th or 15th and 16th because of that. It's weird though, because I can see how Jamar Chase ranks higher from an overall NFL perspective. Like when you're just looking at the players, you're like, Jamar might be better as a receiver than Joe Burrow is as a quarterback in those rankings.
And it's very slight, right?
Very slight.
It is.
But at the same time, if you asked me for the Bengals, who's more important? Like there's no doubt you need Joe Burrow more than you need Jamar Chase. You can get rid of Jamar Chase and you've still got a chance to compete in the AFC North and in the NFL. If you get rid of Joe Burrow, the Bengals are going back to the dark ages immediately. Like I know they kept it going for a couple games last year while he was out. I promise you that's not the case long term.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for 17 games if Jake Browning has a winning record. I do think we saw in the short term, Jake Browning is exactly what you want him to be, a very capable backup quarterback.
With Jamar Chase, by the way.
With Jamar Chase. Yes.
Yeah, it's just different. I mean, the quarterback position is so important. It makes it so hard to do a rankings like this.
Yeah, and again, I can see this ranking last year. I'd imagine Joe Burrow was probably easily inside the top 10 coming off of a Super Bowl and an AFC Championship. But when you've had 2 injury-plagued years out of 4, you get dinged for that, right or wrong.
Yeah, and he should be. Yeah, I agree with that. We have another question here, Skinny, that was Ask Skinny Anything question, but we're in the
Okay.
Bengals, and this is a Bengals topic, and it kind of goes right along with our theme. In fact, it is the most of our theme, I would say. Who would you put on the Bengals Mount Rushmore?
Anthony Munoz, Ken Anderson, Paul Brown, and I got to put him there right now. I'll go Chad Johnson.
Wow.
I could have missed somebody. And this is coming from the guy who beats the drum of Lamar Parrish, but
Yeah,
he's
they're
not
just
on the
not
no.
recognized. That's not
I
recognizable.
think there's the three easy ones are Ken Anderson, Munoz, and Paul Brown, and we can argue about the fourth.
Munoz and Paul Brown are no doubters, automatics. Ken Anderson, I think, is a pretty easy third.
Yeah, that's
once you get to the fourth. I mean, what are the other names that we're even talking about? I know you disagree, but I think Boomer, from a name recognition standpoint, is probably in the conversation.
Boomer's the fifth best quarterback in Bengals history.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think from name recognition standpoint, he's one of the first guys that would come up if you were asking a random fan about Bengals players they could name off the top of their head. Boomer Esiason would be in that group.
I mean, Willie Anderson played tackle. He wouldn't be there, even though he's probably the next Hall of Famer that they're going to have, and rightfully so. I think Willie deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He's come damn close, and it's probably his time. Boy, the fourth one you could make. Boy, that's a good one. I mean, Chad holds all the receiving records. I know that question. I know that question. Somebody wants to put Joe Burrow up there already. Correct?
No, I don't think. I think this came from. I think another site may have been doing this on their thing. Someone asked us this, but I think they got it from someone else's argument this week. And I'll be honest, I didn't see the argument, so I don't know who they had in the conversation. But Burrow, there's no way yet. I mean, he's definitely on the path to that, but there's no way we're in that conversation just yet. But it's not easy to figure. I like Chad Johnson personally.
You know, I think Chad was a clown show, right? You know where my stance is at personally. But
I was shocked to hear you say that.
But because I can't knock what the guy did performance wise. And again, when you're the record holder in literally, I think every major receiving statistical category, which Jamar Chase will probably blow right by at some point if he stays a Bengal, stays healthy. I think both those things are true. You can't ignore that. I can't ignore what he did on the field. I can try to ignore the foolishness and pan that, but I can't pan the performance.
And part of the foolishness, though, adds to why he's probably in this conversation because he was so popular and so well known.
If you put this up for a vote, I bet you he would win that vote of, okay, we've got the three, who's the fourth? And if you said vote right in your candidate or give him 10 candidates, whoever you want to do, he'd win the vote, in my opinion.
I think you're right. And I'll be honest, I'm having a hard time coming up with a fourth name to even compete with him right now. I thought it would be easier to come up with a handful of them, but it's really not. I mean,
if he had stayed playing football instead of going to play the piano, Mike Reed would be on there. Go look him up.
Fair enough. I mean, Corey Dillon doesn't even really approach that, I don't think.
No, he does. I mean, I could make a minor case because he got him to the Super Bowl and really he wasn't the first coach to get him to relevance. Paul Brown was, because Paul Brown took him to 3 playoffs in a short period of time. But Forrest Gregg, I mean, he's got the Mount Rushmore face, does he not?
Yeah, he would look great on it. Yeah,
he really would.
The best part of the Mount Rushmore for the Bengals, though, is Paul Brown's hat.
Oh, for sure. Could you
imagine the extra time they'd have to do on that thing?
No question. That'd be great.
All right. Skinny.
And the other part I'd like to see is, even though it's a face, you have to somehow have Anthony's the crooked finger. You've seen the crooked finger, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You got to have that in there somewhere, right?
Well, you know, I went to Holy Cross High School, and Bruce Kozerski was my football coach and math teacher there. And it was always a big topic of conversation when you'd see him on the board writing. And, like one pinky was sticking out this way, and then the other ring finger could go all types of ways. I mean, those offensive lineman fingers are always just mangled.
They are mangled.
Yeah. All right, Skinny, one other bit of news. This isn't Bengals related, but college football related. The Big 12's media preseason poll came out this week, and not great for Cincinnati. After a rough year last year, they are picked 14th out of 16 teams in this year's preseason Big 12 media poll. Are you surprised by that? Did you expect them to be higher? What are your thoughts there?
No, because, I mean, start looking up the list and go, okay, are they better than this team? That being said, even though they're picked there, I don't think they'll finish 14th in the league, and I think they'll go to a bowl game this year. I really do. I think they've a much improved roster on both sides of the ball. And their schedule is actually very favorable. I mean, they could honestly start this year 4-0 very easily. They play Towson State in a throwaway game. They play Pittsburgh at home. They beat them on the road last year. They play Miami at Miami. And yes, they lost to Miami last year, but we can argue that was the once in 2 decade thing that happens in sports, the upset. And then they've got Houston at home, and Houston's picked below UC. They're actually picked 15th. UC's lone conference win last year came over Houston. It's at home. So they could start 4-0. The other thing they have going for them is out of the top 5 teams that were picked in the league, Utah, the newcomer, was picked number 1, Kansas State number 2, Oklahoma State 3, Kansas 4, Arizona 5. UC only plays one of those 5 this year. They play Kansas State. So they get kind of that mid-pack on down. They actually then play the 2 teams that were picked below them, both Houston and Arizona State. So again, just picking off some of that, this team gets to 6 wins. Honestly, I think it would be disappointing based on the schedule if they don't get to a bowl game this year. And again, I'm not telling you it's a major bowl. It will be a 6 and 6, 7 and 5 level bowl, but I do think that should be the bar for this season.
I mean, in the Big 12 right now, after you get past the first few teams, I mean, I'll even include Kansas and Arizona in that list of first few teams because people think they're going to be good this year, but it's Kansas and Arizona. Like,
no,
I don't think
right.
those strike fear in your hearts as a college football program if you got to play them. But let's go after that. Start with like 6th or 7th here. Iowa State, West Virginia, UCF, Texas Tech.
UC
TCU,
plays all of them. Yeah, they play
Colorado,
all of them.
Baylor, BYU. Those are the teams right in front of Cincinnati.
Yeah, the only ones they don't play out of that mix are Baylor and BYU. So, and those are the rest of them. Yeah, a couple of them are on the road, and those are always tough games, right? But for the most part, they're not playing a bunch of tough teams this season.
Well, and tell me which of those teams you feel like is going to separate from. I mean, this is going to be just a big cluster in the middle of the Big 12 this year. It feels like all these teams are going to have a similar record to me.
But you know, my saying and my stance on all of this is whenever you go to these expanded conferences, right? Somebody's going 3-9. Somebody's going to be picked 14th, 15th, or 16th, and you don't think it's going to be you, bro.
Well, and that's the thing for UC this year. Last year, it felt like the ball got rolling against them. You mentioned the Miami game, and then they really struggled with the adversity. This year, it's like, okay, they've got a nice runway to start their season. Hopefully they get off to a good start. But if they don't, or if they hit a rough patch after those first few games, then how do they respond from that? Because last year, it seemed like they torpedoed pretty quickly and things got a little questionable in Scott Satterfield's first year. Was that just the result of having a mixed roster where you don't have all your guys in yet? Or what was the case? Because last year was kind of a disaster. This year, I think UC fans are going to lose faith really quickly.
Oh, agreed with that. Again. Yeah, I agree with that part. Part of it was they banked on Emory Jones being a good quarterback. I mean,
we talked about that from before the season started. That was a bad idea.
Yeah, it was a bad place to bank. And yeah, I think it did snowball. I mean, that Oklahoma State game, they quit. I mean, they absolutely quit in that game, in my opinion. And that's the thing that when you get in leagues like this, there's just no weeks off. You know, the SEC is talking about going to 9 games. Don't do it. I know you're going to look at it for TV money and all that. It's a gauntlet, man. And it becomes, it starts to snowball. Even when you're having a great season, you can look at me and go, golly, we just had to have this tough game. And now we got these guys next on the road. I think it's just a tough mental and physical grind for these teams to go through. And I hate these big conferences with a passion. I hate them with every fiber of my being. I hate them.
I mean, look at your boy Dion with Colorado. They're 11th, despite all the hype and glam and all the Louis luggage that he brought over there. It's like, this is just a crazy conference. I don't know that it's that good, but it's bunched up.
Crazy
for sure.
Well, it's funny too, because another list I saw right before we started the podcast, I got a push alert from CBS Sports, and it was listing the coaches in the Big 12 in ranking order. I think Dion was actually ranked next to last.
Wow. How about that? All right, Skinny, let's go on to some Ask Skinny Anything. We already asked the Bengals Mount Rushmore question. That was one of them, so I've got 2 left for you here.
Yep.
Tell us about the first time you met Jim Scott, and should the opening day parade be named after Jim?
Wow, great question. Met him actually when I first did morning sports on, I guess then, was it Sports Animal, whatever it was, when we were at iHeart, because we started at a different radio station. I really never had met him before that. And he would literally make it a point on occasion during his breaks, when we actually moved into the studio in not in Mount Adams, because we were on a different floor. We were on the second floor in Mount Adams. LW was on the first floor. He'd say hi and all that. But he would make it a point sometimes to come down the hall and say something to my radio partner, Tom Gamble, and I, something that he heard us, because we would always be on like an hour after him, and he would listen, I guess, on his way home, and he'd come and pop in and say, guys are doing a great job. Keep it up. You know, I heard this. And again, he didn't have to do that. I mean, we were just a couple of schmucks talking sports on the radio, but he made it a point. And all the stories you probably have seen this week about that guy are absolutely true, man. I mean, it comes off almost as a phony, and it really wasn't. He was just a simply super, super nice man, nice human being. And to the point of the second part of that question, I think that would be a hell of a nice gesture, to be quite frank.
Yeah, it's really cool. First of all, I didn't know Jim Scott at all. Never met him personally, didn't know him at all. But hearing the stories this week after we lost him from everyone who did know him in the local media and surrounding. I mean, it wasn't just media people that are talking about him this week. It's everybody in the city. It's really cool to hear the stories and the type of guy he was. And it kind of makes you think about the way you're kind of doing things. You know, you're like, man, if I went, there wasn't a single person that would say these things about me.
No,
I mean,
no.
He's just clearly a very kind, gentle person. It's really cool to hear some of these stories. And as far as the opening day parade, I didn't realize the strong connection between him and the parade.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty cool gesture. I know Mo Egger told this story, and I remember actually when it happened. When Mo was his morning producer, and the late Rich Wahlberg was kind of their executive producer of the show. When he took him to the Marconi Awards, and I didn't know at the time. I remember the day that they went. I went, "Oh, that's pretty cool." He took his staff with him. I didn't realize Jim paid their way to go. The Marconi people, I guess, paid for Jim because he's winning the award, or was up for the award, ended up winning it that year. But for him to actually pay out of his own pocket guys that work for him, again, shows you just that extra touch of class. I know Mo relayed that story. I remember vividly when it happened. I didn't realize Jim had paid for them. I just remember when they went, and I thought, that's pretty cool that he took them along. The fact that he paid for them to take them along is just another step that's just incredible to me.
And anybody who's worked in media and had those first few years where you're like a producer for a morning radio show or something knows you need someone to pay for you to go to an event like that. I mean, I saw the picture of Mo. He had his like Walmart dress shirt on,
yes,
his $60 polyester suit, and a basketball tie. Literally a tie with just basketballs all over. I was like,
I only tie he had.
Mo looks like the epitome of a first or second year sports guy right now. This is how all of us look when we start out. You have no money. You can't dress for anything. And there he is on stage with Joe. I mean, it's a really cool picture and a really cool story to go with it. If you didn't listen to Mo's, like it was like a 30-minute thing, I think, maybe 30 or 40 minutes where he sort of talked about Jim to open a show the other day. It's really good. I'd advise you if you have the time to go back and listen to it.
And he probably knows him as well as anybody because like I said, he started this business not even in sports. He was a morning show producer for Jim Scott. And, that's a tough ask for a young guy because A, you're producing for a legend. B, the last thing you want to do is ever not be on time. And you're young and, you're trying to live the life. And Mo took that job. I remember how seriously he took that. I didn't even know at the time Mo was interested in doing sports talk at that point. He filled in on occasional weekends doing it some after a few years in the business. But I mean, that's literally how he cut his teeth. So he knows the kindness of Jim Scott probably as well as anybody.
What was Jim Scott's show like? I mean, I never heard it. I truly don't know anything about it.
It was honestly just him being a traffic cop of getting in and out of interview segments, getting in and out of breaks. I mean, I will tell you, nobody could do endorsements like Jim Scott did them. I mean, he made you believe in the product. That whole Grippos thing comes off as hokey with the Grippos bag in the pocket, but he never didn't believe in what he was saying and the way he said it, the approach he said it. Listen, I grew up listening to Jim Scott back when AM radio was where the top 40 hits were played. When I first moved back here from Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the mid 70s, he was a DJ on WSAI 1360 at the time. And that was the top station in the marketplace. And so I grew up listening to Jim Scott do that. And then he morphed into obviously a morning radio host and pretty much played just a traffic cop role, but played it very aptly and very well.
All right. One final thing here, asking anything question. If you had to build a new stadium or arena for any of the three major facilities downtown, PBS, GABP, or Heritage Bank Center, which one would you choose and what would you do with it?
I'd rebuild Heritage Bank Center into a multi-purpose facility that, eventually could maybe morph into your football stadium if worse came to worse. I don't think that would be the case, but it would need to be big enough, obviously, to host other major sporting events such as the NCAA tournament.
Are you talking about like an indoor dome football deal?
I would seriously consider it. Yeah, if I had to do it, I would seriously consider it. I mean, Paul Brown Stadium or Paycor Stadium needs a bunch of upgrades. We're in the middle of who's going to pay for it fight. The lease is up in a few years. I mean, this is just going to get to the point of Do they need another stadium? They're going to have to build another stadium, and it's going to come to that. I mean, that topic is going to come up. So if it's going to come up, let's just go. If we're going to redo something, let's redo the other one for a complete multi-purpose situation.
What if the Reds aren't getting the type of deal that they like downtown for a new stadium, and they looked across the river somewhere into northern Kentucky? Would you be down for that?
Yeah, because you're not taking them out of the marketplace.
No, right? I mean, you'd still be in Cincinnati. You'd be, like there's all types of, like, Atlanta moved their
no, that's what I'm saying. You'd still be in the marketplace.
Oh yeah. I'm talking about just moving it across into northern Kentucky somewhere, like across the river somewhere. Is there a place you would dump them, or would you like that to see it move into northern Kentucky to change the way that looked? See, this is fun for a northern Kentucky guy to think about it, but they just fixed downtown. It's like downtown area just got good. Why ruin that?
I'm not looking to ruin. I'm just looking to build a multi-purpose facility down there where Heritage Bank is.
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the question in general. Like, would you consider changing it?
I'd put it over where Lemker Field is in Ludlow.
That would be beautiful.
It would be. You'd have to probably build a little bit out into the Ohio River, right? Because there's no room behind it. There's a road that goes there and houses.
Well, what if Jake Fraley just was like on a floating barge and he just played right field out there in the water? Like, each guy had to get on a barge and play out in the river.
You know who I'd put out there on that barge right now? I'd put Stuart Fairchild and say, just keep taking it all the way down to Pittsburgh. He truly might be the dumbest player I've ever watched play this game. Truly might be the single. He makes a dumb play a day, either in the field or with his arm or running the bases. He really does. I don't know how we got on that topic of it, but I did.
Stuart Fairchild is the dumbest Major League Baseball player you've ever seen. What a way to end this podcast. Stuart Fairchild just kept not a stray, but an absolute shotgun blast right through the middle of his chest.
So instead of Jake Fraley on the barge, it's Stuart Fairchild, and the barge just keeps on going.
After we move Great American Ballpark down to Lemker in the heart of Ludlow.
That'd be great. Could you imagine a Major League Stadium? That would be great.
So I got into a conversation with the guy who asked me this, and he was asking, he's like, "Oh, you know, Kentucky guys, if they're going to fight, don't you want them to just move it across the river?" I'm like, well, in theory, like, I don't know, 25 years ago, I would have thought that was really cool to have a stadium in northern Kentucky. But now they've just got that little area downtown to work. Like, I think it's really nice down there finally. I don't want them to ruin that.
And I agree with you on that. But then that's why, to me, honestly, to answer the question seriously, it would have to be redoing Heritage Bank into a multi-purpose facility. Without it, you're not getting an NCAA tournament here. And I think this city would more than support an NCAA first and second round and or regional tournament, for goodness sakes.
Isn't it crazy to think about, though? And I know it was a little bit different with Synergy/Riverfront because you had both teams using it at the same time. The wear and tear was more significant. But that if we're going on like the same path of stadium length, I mean, you'd be building a new stadium for the Reds and Bengals very soon. Very soon.
The Reds played in Riverfront/Synergy for 33 years, from 1970, 32 years, I guess, 1970 to 2002, because 2003 was the first year of Great American Ballpark. Bengals played for 29 years. 29 years for the Bengals in their current facility would be 2028. Think about that. I mean, that's crazy to think about.
Yeah. I mean, within the next 5 to 10 years, the thought of building a new stadium for either of those teams seems insane to me. I do realize the places are starting to get older, that they need upgrades for sure, but the idea of just like blowing them up and building a new one right now, I just can't imagine anyone's going to be in agreement with that.
No, I think, again, the push for now is, and we'll see what the new sports commission can help push with this, is to have a multi-purpose indoor facility. You have to have that.
All right. Shout out to Stuart Fairchild. I'm going to order a Stuart Fairchild jersey and send it to you.
Here's the thing. For those listening at this point, tell me if I'm wrong in what I said, or if you can give me a dumber player.
I would love to hear who's dumber than Stuart Fairchild after you just shot him with that, because that's an insane accusation to make at the end of a 49-minute podcast when we're
maybe it's recency. Maybe it's recency dumbness is what I've got, because I've watched him make a bunch of dumb plays of late. So it's just recency dumbness.
That could be it. So hit us up with whoever you think is dumber than Stuart Fairchild, and also for your new background drop that we're putting together, I'm going to get you a Stuart Fairchild jersey to put in there. That'll be perfect.
I can't wait. I will put it in there myself for sure. Right. I'll frame that bad boy.
That's all we got.
Thanks for the questions as well. For Rick Boring, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition, presented by Blake the Attorney Maislin.